Forget what you think you know about Jack and Jill falling down a hill. The story is far from a simple warning about being careful. In reality, it's a brilliant, hidden piece of political satire, written in the shadow of the guillotine. It's a coded message that tells the secret story of one of history's most infamous royal scandals, the downfall of a king and his queen. So how did the brutal execution of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette get sanitized into a simple children's rhyme? In this investigation, we will decode every line. By the end, you won't see Jack and Jill as children, but as the tragic symbols for a broken monarchy and a world-changing revolution. Close your eyes and you can almost see it. A perfect sunny day. A green hill rising against a blue sky. At the top, two children, Jack and Jill, holding a single wooden pail between them. Their mission seems simple. Fetch a pail of water. We all know what happens next. A trip, a stumble, and a cascade of tumbles down that grassy slope. It's an image that feels as old as childhood itself. Simple, innocent, and completely harmless. A memory baked into our collective nostalgia, a foundational story we think we know inside and out. This is a question for everyone who grew up with this rhyme. The version I remember had a very strange second verse about Jack using vinegar and brown paper to fix his head. Did anyone else learn that part, and did you ever wonder what that was all about? I'm genuinely curious how many of us share that specific, slightly odder memory. For generations, we've been given simple explanations for this little tragedy. It's a lesson about safety, a cautionary tale reminding children to watch their step. Or maybe it's a story about the frustrations of daily chores, how even the simplest tasks can go wrong. Some historical theories connect it to obscure English village squabbles or old systems of measurement. These explanations are comforting precisely because they keep the rhyme firmly in the world of childhood. They reinforce the idea that Jack and Jill is exactly what it appears to be, a silly, nonsensical story with a simple moral. But this is the first and most critical mistake. These simple meanings are a brilliant disguise. The true story has nothing to do with an accident. It's actually about an execution. We have to look at this differently, not as a nursery rhyme, but as a crime scene, where every element, the hill, the water, the tumble, is a clue left behind. This entire code is designed to hide a political secret in plain sight. And the master key that unlocks the whole mystery lies in that final, fateful phrase, broke his crown. Before we can excavate the history buried beneath this rhyme, we first have to recognize the cracks in the story we already know. We have to look at it not as an artifact of our childhood, but with the critical eye of an investigator. And when you do, the first thing you notice is that the entire premise is fundamentally flawed. The story makes no sense. Think about it for a moment. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder about that? Gravity dictates that water flows downwards. It gathers in streams, in rivers, in wells, at the bottom of hills. Climbing up to get it is an act of profound inefficiency, a complete contradiction of natural law. From a practical standpoint, the story is a failure. And for centuries, we've just accepted this absurdity. But this isn't some careless mistake. This is a deliberate message. This geographical impossibility is the first and most important clue. It's a deliberate signal from the author that we are not in the real world. We are in the world of metaphor. The hill is not a literal hill. It represents a monumental struggle, an uphill battle. And the water is not literal water. It is something precious, something vital for survival, that has become incredibly difficult to obtain. The entire opening line is a setup, a stage direction telling us this is a story about a desperate and arduous quest for a scarce resource against impossible odds. It's a story about ambition and failure, but this glaring logical flaw is just the first breadcrumb on the trail. The names of the characters themselves provide the next clue, leading us ever closer to the rhyme's dark secret. A secret that will ultimately force us to confront the shockingly literal meaning of a broken crown. So, if the setting is a metaphor, who are the actors in this strange play? Let's start with our hero, Jack. The name isn't random. In the deep soil of English folklore, Jack is perhaps the most important name there is. He is the archetypal hero of the common man. Think of the stories. It's Jack who climbs the beanstalk. It's Jack who kills the giants. He is clever, he is resourceful, and he often represents the ambitions of the lower classes, rising up against impossible power. The name itself carries the echo of aspiration. But as we cross the English Channel, the name Jack, or Jacques, takes on a different, more rebellious tone. In France, Jacques Bonhomme, or Jack Goodfellow, was a collective, often derogatory term for the French peasant. It became forever linked to the Jacquerie, a series of bloody peasant revolts that erupted in the 14th century. The name was so intertwined with uprising that it became a symbol of class rage and anti-aristocratic violence. So the name Jack puts us at a fascinating crossroads, establishing an undeniable link between a name and a rebellion, a link I know you'll make with that subscribe button. It represents both the hopeful everyman and the furious revolutionary. He represents something more than just a boy. He is an idea. He is the embodiment of a people's ambition. And what about Jill? In the landscape of the rhyme, she is an enigma. She is almost a shadow. The story is called Jack and Jill, but her role feels secondary, almost an afterthought. She has no stated purpose of her own. She is merely there with Jack. And most tellingly, her fate is completely dependent on his. The rhyme is explicit. Jack fell down first, and only then Jill came tumbling after. She doesn't fall on her own. She doesn't have her own moment of failure. Her collapse is a direct consequence of his. This narrative structure is incredibly specific. Because of this, she isn't positioned as an equal partner in the quest. Instead, she's an associate figure whose destiny is completely and tragically tied to the male protagonist. So this isn't a simple story of two friends on a clumsy adventure. It's the story of a primary figure whose failure automatically triggers the downfall of his female counterpart. This dynamic should feel strangely familiar. It is the classic structure of a monarchy. The king is the primary actor, the one whose decisions dictate the fate of the state. The queen, for all her influence, is symbolically and politically his dependent. Her power, her safety, her very survival is contingent upon his. When the king falls, the queen inevitably tumbles right after him. She is far more than just a girl. She is the archetypal follower, the consort whose fate is not her own. Her presence in the rhyme is the second crucial piece of the puzzle, hinting that this isn't just about class struggle, but about a royal couple. This haunting dynamic of the doomed royal pair is a crucial piece of the puzzle, but it all hinges on the rhyme's single most explosive word. It's a word that, once we connect it to the political terror raging in France at the time, changes everything. Jack fell down and broke his crown. For centuries, we have been told this simply refers to the top of his head. It's a quaint, old-fashioned word for a head injury. And it is. But this explanation requires us to believe in an unbelievable coincidence. It requires us to believe that in a story that is already symbolically rich with uphill struggles and dependent followers, the author just happened to choose a word for head that is also the single most powerful symbol of monarchy and sovereignty in the entire English language. This can't be a coincidence. It has to be a code. In storytelling, and especially in political satire, every single word is chosen for a reason. The use of crown is the ultimate double entendre. On the surface, it gives the story a veneer of childish innocence, a simple bump on the head. But just beneath that surface, it carries the unmistakable weight of regicide. The broken crown is the story's thematic core. It is the conceptual climax. It signals the complete and utter shattering of royal authority. It's the detail that takes this story out of the nursery and places it squarely onto the world stage. The rhyme is much more than hinting at a political story. It is screaming it. The internal evidence is undeniable. The rhyme's own structure proves it was engineered to be about the fall of a king. But now we must leave the world of literary analysis and enter the historical record, because the proof we find there is even more direct and far more damning. The clues hidden within the rhyme's own structure have led us here, to the door of history. Now it's time to open it. An idea, no matter how compelling, is just speculation without evidence. But when we place this simple rhyme against the timeline of history, the speculation solidifies into something much more concrete. The first and most critical piece of historical evidence is not about kings or queens, but about a date on a calendar. Most of us think of nursery rhymes as ancient, timeless things passed down from some primordial age. We assume they are relics of a distant medieval past. But this is not true for Jack and Jill. The French Revolution, the period that tore France apart and reshaped the world, raged from 1789 to 1799. The earliest known printing of the rhyme Jack and Jill appeared in a London publication, John Newbery's Mother Goose's Melody, around the year 1795. Think about what this means. This rhyme didn't exist for centuries before the Revolution. This means it wasn't some piece of ancient folklore being rediscovered. It was contemporary social commentary being created in real time. It was the 18th century equivalent of a political meme, a viral story spreading through England that satirized the bloody events happening just across the channel. This timeline is our foundation. It proves the rhyme was born from the same world, the same chaos, and the same anxieties as the revolution itself. With the timeline secured, we can now decode the central metaphor, the hill and the water. If this is a story about the French Revolution, then the hill is the Ancien Régime, the old order of France. It was a towering, immovable social structure made of 3 estates. The third estate, the common people, were at the bottom. And at the very top, like an unreachable peak, sat the first and second estates, the clergy and the nobility. This was the hill Jack had to climb, and the water he was sent to fetch. That was the tax revenue needed to save France from complete bankruptcy. After extravagantly funding the American Revolution and indulging in decades of royal excess, the French treasury was empty. King Louis XVI, our Jack, was faced with an impossible task. His finance ministers proposed a solution that was both radical and obvious. They had to get water from the top of the hill. They had to tax the privileged classes. This was a direct assault on the very foundation of the old order. For centuries, the nobility and clergy had been exempt from most taxes. They had all the wealth, but carried none of the burden. Louis's attempt to make them pay was his desperate uphill battle. He was trying to fetch a pail of water from a place that had never produced it before, and from people who would rather see the country collapse than give up a single drop of their privilege. This leads us to the fall. When King Louis presented his tax reforms to an assembly of notables, a hand-picked group of the most powerful elites in France, he was arrogantly and universally rejected. They refused to be taxed. This moment, this political humiliation, was his first great stumble. This was Jack losing his footing. That single failure forced his hand, leading him to make a catastrophic decision. He would call the Estates General, a massive assembly of all 3 classes, for the first time in 175 years. He had hoped to use it to force his reforms through, but instead, it lit the fuse of revolution. From that point on, Jack's fall accelerated. The storming of the Bastille shattered his authority. The Women's March on Versailles in October 1789 was even more devastating. A mob of furious citizens stormed the palace and forced the royal family to leave their golden sanctuary, relocating them to Paris, where they were effectively prisoners of the revolution. This was the metaphorical breaking of his crown. He had been the sacred vessel of God's will on earth, but now he was just a man, a failed leader who had lost control of his kingdom. He had tripped at the top of the hill, and now he was tumbling, head over heels, down into chaos, bringing the entire French monarchy down with him. The rhyme shows us the fall wasn't a single event, but a slow, painful process of collapse. The rhyme has now perfectly mapped his entire political collapse, but it saves its most brilliant and most gruesome revelation for the final act of violence. And now we arrive at the pivotal revelation. The linchpin that connects every clue and transforms this clever satire into a work of shocking, brutal genius. We have to look again at that final line. Jack fell down and broke his crown. We've discussed its metaphorical meaning, the loss of sovereignty. But the true dark brilliance of this rhyme is that it is also horrifically literal. This phrase is a direct, unflinching reference to the king's execution by guillotine. Can you imagine the shock of hearing this rhyme for the first time, knowing what it truly meant? On January 21st, 1793, the man who was once King Louis XVI of France was taken to the Place de la Révolution. He was now called Citizen Louis Capet, stripped of all titles. He was placed on a wooden plank, his neck locked into a brace called a lunette. Above him was the blade. The guillotine was a terrifying symbol of the revolution's new logic. It was seen as a machine of grim equality. It killed the king with the same mechanical indifference it used on any commoner. And what was its sole purpose? To sever the head, the crown of the body, from the torso. In that moment, the metaphor and the reality fused into one. The blade fell, and Jack's crown was broken. This describes more than a fall from grace. It describes a fall from the neck. This one, grisly detail, explains everything. It is the punchline of the joke. This is why the rhyme has survived. It doesn't just tell the story of a king's failure. It tells the story of his decapitation, smuggling the graphic image of regicide into the one place no one would ever think to look for it, a song for children. This brings us, finally, to Jill. With Jack's fate sealed, what becomes of his companion? The rhyme gives us the haunting answer. And Jill came tumbling after. This line is so much more than just poetic language. It's a work of precise, sequential history. It perfectly describes the fate of Queen Marie Antoinette. After Louis was executed, her own tragic end became an inevitability. To the people of France, she was Madame Deficit, the foreign queen whose lavish spending had bankrupted the nation. She was a symbol of everything they hated about the aristocracy. While imprisoned, she was subjected to a vicious smear campaign and a sham trial. The charges against her were cruel and often absurd, including the infamous and completely fabricated accusation that she had committed incest with her own young son. Her guilt was never in question. The trial was merely a piece of political theater designed to justify her death. And so, on October 16th, 1793, less than 9 months after her husband, Marie Antoinette was taken to the same scaffold and met the same fate. She came tumbling after. Doesn't that perfectly capture the rhyme's haunting final line? Her fall wasn't an independent event. It was a direct consequence of his. The story of Jack and Jill is therefore not just the story of one execution, but two. It is a historical record, a hidden transcript of the fall of the House of Bourbon. It tells us that once the king was destroyed, the queen's destruction was sure to follow. The rhyme is a complete narrative, a 2-act tragedy of revolution, brilliantly condensed into a handful of seemingly innocent lines. So, in the end, Jack and Jill is far from a simple story about an accident. It's a powerful relic of revolution. It's a brilliant and brutal piece of political commentary, a hidden transcript that smuggled the graphic story of a king and queen's execution into the mouths of children for over 200 years. But encoding dark truths in stories meant for the young wasn't unique to the 18th century. What if another famous tale, one that seems to warn us about talking to strangers, is actually a cover for a far older, more terrifying secret about humanity's primordial battle with nature itself? The lie of Little Red Riding Hood is finally exposed in the video on your screen right now. Click it and find out what the big bad wolf truly is.